Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Ukrainian crews trained to fight in Spanish Leopard 2A4 battle tanks. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov tells Vladimir Putin troops in Ukraine will fight until victory. And another Putin ally, Nikolai Patrushev, says Russia doesn't know who blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline. Two women were killed and 3 other people were wounded after a residential area in the town of Volnovakha in the Russian-controlled part of Ukraine's Donetsk region came under fire. According to the Donetsk news agency, a Russian investigator collecting evidence on the scene accused Ukrainian forces of being behind that attack. The investigator said, quote, "Today at daytime, the Ukrainian military hit civilian infrastructure. As a result, exactly the civilian infrastructure is damaged. There are no military objects or military vehicles around." The town of Volnovakha is located some 63 kilometers southwest of Donetsk city. It was taken by Russian forces on March the 11th, 2022 in fierce battles 2 weeks after Moscow launched what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine. And the European Union Council has announced it had extended sanctions placed on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine for a further 6 months. The Council said in a statement that the sanctions, which will remain in effect until September the 15th, 2023, target those responsible for undermining or threatening the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. The current sanctions apply to 1,473 individuals and 205 entities and include travel restrictions, the freezing of assets, and a ban on making funds, other economic resources available to the listed individuals and entities. It adds that Russia must stop its atrocious war immediately. The EU's renewal of sanctions against Russia comes after the bloc approved its 10th package of sanctions in February. And the situation around Bakhmut remains difficult, but Ukrainian forces are repelling all Russian attempts to capture the town. That's according to the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, Colonel General Alexander Syrskyi. General Syrskyi says, quote, "All enemy attempts to capture the town are repelled by artillery, tanks, and other firepower." General Syrskyi also says that the Russian Wagner group of mercenaries are attacking from several directions, trying to break through the defenses of our troops and advance to the central districts of the town. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Ukraine's future depended on the outcome of battles in key points in the east. Speaking during his usual nightly address, Mr. Zelensky said the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut has become the main focus of a Russian winter campaign, with both sides saying they have been relentlessly fighting in and around the small ruined city.
Дуже жорстко на Сході, дуже болісно. Треба знищити військову потугу ворога, і ми знищимо. Білогорівка і Мар'їнка, Авдіївка і Бахмут, Вугледар і Кам'янка та усі інші місця, де зараз вирішується, яким буде наше майбутнє, де виборюється. Це і є дієвою гарантією захисту свободи України, всієї Європи та вільного світу. Наші
Only our warriors and global pressure on Russia an effective guarantee of protecting the freedom of Ukraine, the whole of Europe, and the free world. As always, today I was in touch with our commanders with intelligence. It's very tough in the east, very painful. We must destroy the enemy's military power, and we shall destroy it. Bilogorivka and Marinka, Avdiivka and Bakhmut, Kamyanka, and all other places where it is now being decided what our future will be, where our future of our Ukrainians is being fought for. We have discussed how to support our farmers. The second sowing during the full-scale war has already started. Last year, the heroic efforts of our farmers and our all workers in the agriculture sector made it possible to preserve Ukrainian agricultural production. Ukraine's global role as a guarantor of food security, and I thank everyone who contributed to this. The government is working out appropriate steps to support the industry.
And dozens of Ukrainian soldiers have wrapped up a 4-week training in Spain on how to operate the Leopard 2A4 battle tank, of which Madrid is set to deliver 6 units to Kiev this spring. Spain's armed forces said in a statement that a total of 40 tank crew members and 15 mechanical specialists underwent training on their use at a military base in the northeastern city of Zaragoza. Kiev has secured from several of its Western allies pledges to send modern battlefield tanks to help fend off Russia's invasion as Moscow steps up its efforts to make advances in eastern Ukraine.
They worked before with battle tanks that are very different from the ones they are going to use, the Leopard 2A4. But we must not forget that a person who has never used an armored vehicle has nothing to do with another who has been in one. Although the tanks are different, there are many systems that match, and that has made things much easier. Together with the motivation that the crew brought and the desire to learn, we see them very well prepared to join the combat again, the conflict after just a month. From the 10 crews made of 40 people we have carried out in the first phase, individual tactical training for drivers, gunners, loaders and commanders, and in the second phase we have put them as a crew so that they are ready to work together in a tank.
Y en la segunda fase los hemos unido como tripulación para que ya funcionen dentro de un carro de combate.
And European states increased their imports of major weaponry by 47% in the 5 years to 2022, while the United States' share of global arms exports rose to 40% from 33%. That's according to a leading conflict think tank. Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, following years of growing tensions, has prompted European countries to rush to bolster their defenses. European states in the United States-led NATO alliance increased their arms imports by 65% from the previous 5-year period, but worldwide international arms transfers fell about 5%. The United States and Russia have been the world's largest and second largest arms exporters for the past 3 decades. Russian Security Council Secretary and former Security Chief Nikolai Patrushev says Moscow still does not know who carried out the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. Mr. Patrushev said recent reports of Ukrainian involvement are questionable, affirming earlier comments from the Kremlin that media reports of a pro-Ukrainian group behind the attack were hard to believe. Mr. Patrushev reiterated that Russia wants an objective investigation into the explosions. Without it, the voicing of unilateral subjective versions of the terrorist attack do not explain anything. Ukraine has denied any involvement in the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, following a report in the New York Times citing intelligence sources who said that a pro-Ukrainian group may have been behind last year's attack targeting Russia's gas deliveries to Europe. In another development, Australia has offered China a briefing over its nuclear-powered submarine deal with the United States and Britain, but is not aware of any response from Beijing. According to Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles, the government has made more than 60 calls over the last week to leaders, including in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, to inform them about the agreement known as the AUKUS Pact. U.S. President Joe Biden, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in San Diego, California, unveiled details of a plan to provide Australia with nuclear-powered attack submarines, a major step to counter China's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific.
We've made more than 60 calls to regional and world leaders. There has been a huge diplomatic effort which has underpinned the announcement today, and that's been going on for months, but it's particularly been going on over the last week between myself, the Minister for the Pacific in this context, the Foreign Minister, and indeed the Prime Minister. We've made more than 60 calls to regional and world leaders within the Pacific, within ASEAN, within our Five Eyes partners. I'll let those countries speak for themselves, but I am very grateful for the response that we have received. We watch the global rules-based order being placed under enormous pressure in Eastern Europe, but also in the Indo-Pacific. And we are witnessing the biggest conventional military build-up that we have seen since the end of the Second World War. And it's happening within our region. And it is not Australia which is doing that. And we need to respond to this. A failure to do so would see us be condemned by history. We want to be completely transparent with our neighbours and with the world about what we're doing and why we're doing it. You know, what our strategic intent is. You know, our concern about other military build-ups is that they happen in a manner which is opaque and where neighbours are left uneasy as to why it is occurring. That is why we have gone to such an effort to make clear exactly why we are taking the steps that we're taking.
Let's talk now to a Ukrainian member of parliament and leader of the Golos party, Kira Rudik, who joins us virtually from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Good morning to you, Kira. Thank you for your time. Nice to see you again. Kira, can you hear me? It does seem as if we're having a bit of...
Excuse me, when do we start? Because my next TV show is...
Are you able to hear me? All right, let's take a break. When we'll come back, we hope we'll have Kira on the line. And after that break, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko, signed cooperation agreements in Tehran. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and his Iranian counterpart Ibrahim Raisi have signed cooperation agreements during Mr. Lukashenko's visit to Tehran. According to Iran's West Asian news agency, the agreements covered joint industrial, agricultural, transportation, and logistics projects. Mr. Raisi said after signing the agreements, Iran and Belarus relations had been strengthened in recent years and their economic partnership was stronger than ever. Mr. Lukashenko said sanctions on both countries allowed them to explore new opportunities and the countries shared positions on many international issues. The economies of both countries have been hit by international sanctions in recent years. The leader of Russia's Chechen region, Ramzan Kadyrov, has told Russian President Vladimir Putin that his troops in Ukraine would fight until victory was achieved. Mr. Kadyrov, a staunch ally of the Russian leader, said fighters from this region were successfully carrying out their duties and were intent on fighting to the victorious end. Speaking at the Kremlin, Mr. Kadyrov said people in the southern Russian region were fully behind what Moscow's called its special military operation in Ukraine. The son of former Chechen President Akhmat Kadyrov, who was assassinated in a 2004 bombing in Grozny, Mr. Kadyrov has formed a tacit alliance with the co-founder of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, amplifying each other's criticism of Russia's military top brass and calling for more vigorous prosecution of the conflict. And the United Nations has affirmed its commitment to the Black Sea grain deal after Moscow floated renewing it for a shorter period. After a meeting in Geneva, the United Nations said in a statement, which partly reads, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has confirmed that the UN will do everything possible to preserve the integrity of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and ensure its continuity. Russia has suggested extending the deal, which allows the safe export of grain from Ukraine's Black Sea ports, but only for a period of 60 days. Meanwhile, U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said it was a critical moment in negotiations on the UN-brokered Black Sea Grain Initiative, which Washington hopes will be extended before it expires on March the 18th. Mr. Price said the world needs the initiative, which he said allowed grain shipments to developing countries and help bring down food prices.
Let me just say we're at a critical moment in these negotiations. Extending the Black Sea Grain Initiative requires the consent of all the parties, and that's something the UN Secretary General is working on, including. Let me just say we're at a critical moment in these negotiations. Extending the Black Sea Grain Initiative requires the consent of all the parties, and that's something the UN Secretary General is working on, including at this very moment. So we're going to defer to the UN Secretary General. We're going to defer to the other parties that are directly involved in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. In fact, the world needs this. The world needs the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We believe it should be extended. We believe it should be expanded. And we believe that because we've seen the implications of a world with the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and we've seen a world without the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Over 4 million metric tons of wheat have gone directly to developing countries as a result of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. That may seem like an abstract number, but it boils down to 8 billion loaves of bread to the developing world. So this is a critical instrument at a critical time. We know that the world needs this. We certainly hope and expect to see it extended and expanded.
Now let's hear from Russia, which says it is not opposed to extending the deal that allows for Black Sea grain exports, but only for a limited time. Monday marked the first day of talks between Russia and representatives from the UN in Geneva. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin said Russia does not object to extending the deal after it expires on March the 18th, but only for 60 days. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, brokered between Russia and Ukraine by the United Nations and Turkey last July, aimed to prevent a global food crisis by allowing Ukrainian grain blockaded by Russia's invasion to be safely exported from 3 Ukrainian ports. Let's talk now to Mr. Yekachi Adekoya, security consultant, who joins me here in the studios. Good morning to you. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people assumed that this extension would just happen. As a matter of fact, prices had started dropping on the basis that it was going to happen. Now, it does seem as if some of those predictions are a bit, shall we say, too optimistic, because Russia has its objections, and it's not cooperating, if you like. How much of a risk is the world taking here by simply assuming that this will go on?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think Russia has been cooperating, to be fair to the Russians, and I do hope that perhaps they will come on air, on channels, and speak for themselves. The principle upon which the grain deal was agreed upon was that some of this grain from Ukraine will flow alongside agricultural products and produce from Russia, Russian fertilizer, and the rest. Now, it does look as though Russia has upheld its own part of the bargain, despite the attack on its Black Sea fleet, and of course the destruction of the flagship, Russian flagship on the Black Sea. So, despite that, Turkey reached out to Russia, brokered an understanding again. That corridor was open. In any case, Turkey is also a major party in this deal because, again, it controls that strait where which vessels must go out from. So Russia has kept its own part of the bargain fairly. despite the provocations, even the Snake Island provocations. There's been a lot of back and forth within the Black Sea. Russia has continued to say, we can't keep guaranteeing the grains from Ukraine if you cannot guarantee the grains from Russia, fertilizer from Russia, and other byproducts from Russia. So those are the concerns that Russia really has. Again, Russia has argued, not holding brief for them, that the bulk of the grain, the premise from the, Guterres, the UN secretary, also made a case to say, okay, the poor countries need access to this grain. But the grains, according to reports, are not going to the poor countries. I think over 70% stated is going to Europe and to the West, basically. So Russia, again, is saying that the condition...
You're flouting this deal.
Yeah, you're still flouting the deal. The precondition was to consider Africa and ensure that you don't have a food crisis in this part of the hemisphere. So Russia has some grounds to object to a renewed deal on the same conditions that have existed in the first one. So I think I'm still optimistic because both parties need the deal to go through. The West needs the deal, Russia needs the deal, even Africa also needs the deal. The UN is also very optimistic. So I think something will be hashed out. Again, amongst the conditions of the deal, some security guarantees have to be given to Russia for its own naval fleet within the Black Sea. And again, Crimea being a no-go area as part of. So I think parties are quite entrenched in their position. They're just hashing out how this will proceed. But I'm sure Russia is saying, we're not going to proceed until we get those conditions and concessions that they've been asking for. I think those are the things holding that up.
Coming to the conflict itself now, a lot of the recent talk has featured around two things broadly. The first is the battle for Bakhmut. Most of those I've spoken to, like you, security consultants, analysts, and people who are experts in the field, say they can't understand why there's so much being poured into Bakhmut, either by Russia or even by Ukraine. That's on one hand. The second is the issue of the pledges for military hardware that were made to Ukraine. Apparently, those pledges are not coming to fruition as quickly as Ukraine might have hoped. And that by the time they eventually come to fruition, changes might have occurred on the battlefield that may prove irreversible. Those 2 points, what do you make of them?
So first on Bakhmut, Bakhmut has both a strategic value and some propaganda value to both sides. Because of the mines in and around the steel complex, the meat factories, there are a number of underground tunnel system within the area of Bakhmut, where the Ukrainian forces have been able to use as weapon storage, logistics hub for the Donbass, the Donetsk-Donbass axis. So it's a major logistic hub for Ukraine. Now, the areas around Bakhmut had been seriously fortified. So once you roll over, from a Russian perspective, once you roll over the defenses of the Ukrainians in Bakhmut, that creates like a bridgehead. So you then have, I think, Kramatorsk, Nes, and some other
number of towns, which the Ukrainian president said they would get to in no time once they rule over Bakhmut.
So that's why you see it's like the Battle of Leningrad, Stalingrad. So
yeah, Stalingrad.
So there are a number of things that can happen should Bakhmut fail and fall very quickly. Now, on the part of the Ukrainians, they are also gaining some time, because as long as you can slow that Russian invasion, slow the Russian machine, grind them down a bit, extract from them some personnel, some equipment cost, you can make the eventual capture of Bakhmut a very costly venture for Russia. Now, on the Ukrainian side, there's been a lot of propaganda saying we're winning the war, we're winning the war. You can't go back to the populace and then say, oh, we just lost Bakhmut, which, you've invested so much in. So in terms of a moral perspective, it's key for Ukraine to keep themselves in the fight. But, we've seen advice from the US to say that you need to roll back, allow Bakhmut fall, but that's intangible value that Bakhmut holds to the Ukrainians is very significant for them. So there's no way they're going to let that up anytime soon. For the Russians, I do fear that the Russians are not doing as much as they can do. Most of the battles, artillery duels you're seeing along the lines of contact are almost like a shaping of the front lines for a major offensive. I think that Russia has showed that it's going to play long, so it's not in any hurry for any blitzkrieg approach. It will take its time, slow grind the Ukrainian wheel, to slow grind the Western support out of. Already you're seeing the Russian strategy working. We've seen 2 or 3 banks go down in the US. Again, don't forget that the world had come out of a COVID lockdown restriction and economic problem, creating a supply side problem. Then Russia-Ukraine then happened. Then that supply chain crisis became worse.
Even worse, yeah.
You then have an alliance between the East. Just take Russia, India, China, and then you have Saudi, Iran.
Yeah.
Those are commodity superhouses forming a bloc. What you have in the East, in the West rather, is nominal GDP. You claim that America's economy is the biggest if you are looking at nominal terms. But if you are looking at purchasing power parity, China is the biggest economy in the world. So you have China, the biggest economy, with Russia in an alliance, a major superpower in terms of missile systems, in terms of defense technology. Russia has not done badly. Russia has been at war with NATO even since 2014. NATO stocks are being depleted. America would now need about 1.3 trillion, 1.2 trillion to replenish its stock. So some of us are looking and saying the lessons of the Iraqi-Afghanistan war has not been learned, because America spent about 5 trillion. Yeah. If you look at the accounting clearly, correct, in those wars, they've still not learned anything. So there's a lot of cost in terms of the war to the US. There's a lot of economic cost and pain and hardship which Europe is also going through. I mean, Germany's economy was the biggest, most thriving economy. The euro was thriving as a rival to the US dollar in terms of the reserve basket.
Right.
So the euro's economy is now, tanking. America is doing fairly well. So there are a number of costs that the West is having to bear in their position against Russia. And mind you, Russia signaled that it's going nowhere and it's not used its most devastating force when it shot 6 Kinzhal missiles, which is
which got through, by the way. The Ukrainian defense.
There is no system that can, the Patriot missile cannot stop it. Nothing the US has or the West has in their arsenal and those missiles are nuclear capable. Russia even has nuclear capable artillery. So Russia has not even used its Saturn II missile. It doesn't have to. It has not used I think the US has the mother of all bombs. Russia has the father of all bombs. So we've not seen heavy munition, heavy devastating capability of the Russian forces being used. Some people joke and say perhaps Putin is the most reasonable person on the Russian side. You've heard from the Chechen guy. I mean, these guys are going. The smaller Tatar republics, all these other republics in Russia, if you look at the Battle of Volodar,
right.
Some of the things happening on the front line is just overexcited ethnic Russians wanting to have a go at the
Ukrainians
at any cost whatsoever without any strategy. I mean, they are, and the sentiment in Russia is, I mean, there's a war against America and the internal rivals, the US. So in Russia, the deputy chief of the Security Council, which is the former Russian president, he's a hawk on this matter. Medvedev. And a lot of people are saying, nuke Ukraine. They can't take it any longer. Putin is the only person seemingly being a bit rational about this and wanting to go long with the West, because you can't fight a major power at its doorstep and seek to win. You will lose the eventual logistical battle. Russia has all the resources it needs. Russia is a fairly independent, productive state. In terms of the war footing, the industrial complex is ramping up missiles. We've heard Russia run out of missiles. It hasn't run out of missiles. It's now using drone system. It has adapted. The danger is that Russia is learning and adapting to all the strategies of NATO. Russia is now using a lot of UAVs, dropping mini bombs, doing a lot of things that Russia was not doing. And if you go into history, Russia has a propensity to learn, adapt, adjust, and win a war of attrition. So Russia seeks to play to its own strength while also holding back the big stick to determine you know, when that red line is eventually crossed. And this
use it.
And again, I like to say that I've said everywhere, I don't see how Russia will lose this war, because Russia is a nuclear power. And
and they've made clear, of course, that if it looked like that, you know, they might be losing or they might be about to lose, they would use nuclear
eventually
weapons.
That's why you say Russia cannot lose. I mean, and if you listen to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia now, and they've said that what they sought to achieve through diplomatic means is clear to them they can only achieve now through military means. Don't forget that Russia has been taking the peaceful approach since 2014. Viktor Lukashenko, I think the then president of Ukraine, when that crisis started, wrote a letter inviting Russia to use military means to stem the Nazi takeover, according to his own wording, in Ukraine. Putin waved that off. Putin didn't take the military option. That was a Ukrainian head of state inviting Russian forces to come into Russia and use military means to stabilize. So if Russia had that intention of coming in, that was a lawful invitation.
Opportunity.
Putin didn't take that because Putin, like China, was focused more on business, keeping the gas line, Nord Stream 2 going, keeping everything. Just, again, saying to the West, Ukraine is a red line. Don't cross this red line. You know, and NATO has shown itself to take over the Baltic states. Russia didn't really bother by our own assessment because those were not major military superpowers.
You're talking about Latvia, Estonia,
and the rest,
Lithuania.
Those are just, so they were not really a major, but a Ukraine had an army that was stronger in terms of training depth, the rigor, than the UK army, had over 300,000 army. So a Ukraine, a hostile Ukraine on the border of Russia, nuclear capable or missile capable Ukraine, with the force and the history it has, an industrial complex it has on the doorsteps of Russia, was an existential threat for Russia. So when they say Russia provoked this war, Russia has said this is a war of necessity because its own, and it has not even yet called this a war. So full mobilization.
Special military operation.
Still a military, with positioning in Belarus, ready for Poland, and then intervention coming in from the west through Poland. You can see the Polish wanting to build its own army to over 300,000 strong. So you can see this posturing. But in terms of the devastating munitions that Russia has seemingly not yet played its full hand in this conflict. And I think that the propaganda war is shaping a bit because you can now see China coming in. And again, just to make this point, I think it was then Donald Trump that said, the day you see China and Russia come together, you know that it's a major problem for the West. China and Russia has said that the alliance has now become the new pillar upon which global peace will be built. And I just saw a report that suggested that New Zealand wants to join BRICS. Saudis are about to join BRICS. Argentina has been given a green light to join BRICS. And so gradually, BRICS already controls about 40% of global GDP. In terms of population mass, they are far bigger than anything you have. Bigger than the G7, bigger than NATO countries. They have the commodities, they have the purchasing power, they have the gas, because combined they have over 45% of the gas reserve. So BRICS will have everything. Once BRICS floats its new currency, with the currency crisis you see in the US, your guess is as good as mine what will begin to happen. So I think that both parties have overestimated their strengths and maybe not done their risk assessment thoroughly. The West had assumed that with all the munitions they pumped into Ukraine since 2014 and all the sanctions, over 10,000 sanctions now on Russia, that Russia's economy would have collapsed. IMF projected the GDP of Russia would drop by 11%. It is reported it's dropped only 2%.
2%, yeah.
Though there are some arguments that Rosstat is the one giving the figures, you may not be able to rely on those figures. Even at that, exports, energy exports to India, China,
and so on, have all gone up. Has all record levels.
Record levels. So Russia is still exporting. It's still a major exporter of base metals or fertilizers. The West is still buying nuclear fuel from Russia. You know, some of those Western countries have also circumvented their own sanctions. They are still importing.
Using third parties.
They are still importing. So Russia is going nowhere. The economy is quite resilient. So it looks as though with the backing of the East, it's not even Japan at the time when Japan was nuked. You can't basically do much with Russia. So I do think that a negotiation would have to be the way out of this. Otherwise, we may just be faced with a nuclear disaster, and that will pay nobody. I mean, I don't see, if Russia nukes Ukraine, God forbid, America is not going to nuke Russia back because of its nuked Ukraine. That will lead to what is called mutual assured destruction, because the nuclear arsenal that the West has, combined West, is just about the same thing that Russia has, and then factor in China. So what it looks like in the long-run analysis is that the position of the West is being weakened compared to China's position, because China has not even started its own problem in the Indo-Pacific
at all, and
all those axes. So China is licking its lips practically at this ongoing conflict with Russia. So I do think that for once in a long time, the West picked the wrong fight at the wrong time. You picked the fight when the world had not recovered from the COVID-19 crisis. Yeah. You triggered a supply chain problem. Now the Feds are having to increase rates, which is the wrong thing to do at this time. You have a supply side.
All hopes were that they were going to reduce.
So you have a supply side crisis, and you are increasing rates. You are just going to worsen the crisis that you have, because when you increase rates, you want to slow down demand. But demand is not the problem now. You don't even have the
goods to supply.
And then you're increasing rates. So this problem will be compounded. The Feds, I think the FDC has said that unassessed risk or unassessed loss or undeclared loss, the banks are seeing over 620 billion of it. The Fed's exposure is about 1.2 trillion.
Sure, yeah.
We've seen the inverted curve, signaling a recession inbound in the US. The long and short implication is that it doesn't make sense. Short-term money has more value than long-term money. So 100 naira today, for example, is more valuable than 100 naira 10 years down the line. So the whole fiat currency fiasco and the crisis created by excessive quantitative easing, you know, it's just coming to a head.
Yeah, the chickens are now coming home to roost.
So the problems are going nowhere for the West anytime soon. And that domino effect, we followed all the analysis, Bloomberg, Oxford Economics, everybody's been claiming that before 2025, there will be a major global economic crisis and a reset. Credit Suisse is not looking good because it's exposed to mortgage and the risk with it. Once you increase rates, the construction, real estate sector would also take a hit. People are now seemingly walking away from their mortgage repos. So a lot of problem is in the works. When you see the US president come out to make a statement and say there's no problem, you know there's a problem. When the authorities are saying there's no, you know that something is not adding up. So I think that the Ukraine business is becoming very expensive for the West. Maybe all this would not have been necessary if we just say, okay, Russia has said, the US has its Monroe Doctrine, which says that anything that affects US national interests within a specific sphere, they would have to intervene. You have that doctrine in place. Russia is saying, hey, we don't mind Latvia and those Lithuania, they are not a problem to us. They don't have the military to threaten us. Ukraine, on the other hand, is a major force in Europe. Major force in Europe. A war which UK has what, 60, 70,000 troops. Yes. I mean, they've said that with what UK has, they won't last 2 weeks of war with Russia. So what Russia is doing with the Ukrainian army is no mean feat at all, despite all the supply since 2014, despite the fact that it has not yet brought out its very, very big guns. So I don't know where this is going to and what the game is, but I do think that at some point in time, we all have to calm down, sit down, because Ukraine has lost its economy. People are dying every day. You can't count the amounts of lives lost in Ukraine. The German person said it was about 150,000 soldiers lost. I don't know which army can lose 150,000 soldiers and still survive. You know, so there are a lot of foreign legions fighting Ukraine. Ukraine is destroyed. The economy is destroyed. The bulk of Ukrainian wealth was in the east. There's a lot of coal reserve, a lot of oil and gas. There's a lot of things in the east. So Ukraine has lost a lot so far.
Indeed.
Yeah, so the problems are big and they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Indeed. This has been most interesting. Very unusual to get this side of the analysis. Thank you very much, Onyekachi Adekoya, for this perspective. Thank you so much. All right, the White House has said the U.S. has been encouraging Chinese President Xi Jinping to speak directly with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky amidst reports the Chinese leader would hold a call with the Ukrainian leader. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, quote, "We have been encouraging President Xi to reach out to President Zelensky because we believe President Xi himself should hear directly the Ukrainian perspective and not just the Russian perspective on this. We have in fact advocated to Beijing that that connection should take place." Mr. Sullivan added that American officials have spoken with their Ukrainian counterparts and that Ukrainians had not officially gotten confirmation there would be a phone call or a video conference with Mr. Xi. Let's take a break. When we return, reactions trailed the Oscar win by the film Navalny, which talks about the poisoning that nearly killed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who is still in jail. Please stay on with us. All right, welcome back. Laddie Williams of our business desk is here. Morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
So it's all about grain
Yes.
today. We've talked a lot about grain. And
bread,
Russia.
Bread, you can also
bread,
say, yeah.
pasta,
and all of
wheat.
that.
Yeah. Now, Russia says the Black Sea grain deal will be extended automatically if there are no objections.
No objections, and obviously that's a scary part, you know, with that statement.
Why do you say that?
They have, you know,
of course, they have
their demands. They have, you know, objections. They have demands, and the demands are quite difficult, you know, for the U.S. and allies to actually, you know, send to, because they want, you know, some of the restrictions on their own grains taken out. There are no restrictions on, you know, their grains and all of that, but it's the logistics
of getting
it out of there. So they're saying they also want some of those restrictions lifted. It also has to do with payments too, because we know the financial system there has been hammered, you know, on the global scene. They're not able to make some of these payments. That's why we've seen them try to, you know, get in cryptocurrencies into the whole global payment system, but that has not been able to work for now. So they need some of those restrictions lifted. And we're already seeing it play out in the wheat market. We're seeing prices, you know, move up and down as expected. It's quite volatile at this time. See wheats there trading about $290 a ton. It fell about $2 last week, and it's still on that downward trend. But we did see an uptick when there were indications
that the deal would be renewed. I remember you and I having this conversation.
So at the end of the day, we know the bulls, the wheat bulls and bears are watching, you know, waiting for that shoe to drop.
Right.
If Russia is going to say, you know what, we're not renewing this deal
anymore, and
we're going to see the prices, you know, rise, and we know the domino effect, you know, for the global market. We know condemnina countries, they're going to suffer it. Even here in Nigeria, we import wheat too, so we don't need those prices going up. And at the end of the day, this deal, we need this deal to actually go through. We need it renewed. Indications are it will be renewed, but you know we still have that but in there, which is
not looking good. Now, U.S. CPI data is expected today.
Yeah, all eyes on that data, because we've seen how the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed.
That has shriveled away.
Yeah, that has impacted, you know, the banking industry and markets. And at the end of the day, everyone is expecting some kind of pivot from the U.S. Fed because of what's happening with their financial system, which could, you know, rattle the whole
brought
global...
out U.S. President Joe Biden yesterday to reassure markets and investors. Because
you don't want a bank run, you know, on most of the banks in America. Nobody wants that, because that would, you know, impact the economy negatively, and some kind of financial system collapse could happen. So at the end of the day, this has kind of pushed investors to expect some kind of pivot, but there are still indications that if this CPI data for February, if it comes in hotter than expected, because in January we had about 6.4%, but analysts are expecting 6% for February, which is a decline. But if it comes out hotter than that, then what's the Fed going to do next? Are they still going to keep raising rates? Because they have said that they will keep raising rates as long as inflation stays elevated.
Right.
But
I mean, all these other conditions are there now. Yeah, because
at the risk of the U.S. banking industry, if they keep, you know, raising
the rates,
is the rates being so high? That's what, you know, caused the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. Yeah. So if they keep raising it, that means we might see that impact other banks in the U.S., because, you know, some other banks too might have had some kind of bets too in the bonds market. Indeed. You know, and we know that inverse relationship. And the contagion, it is spreading, you know, at this time. Even though it did impact the crypto market negatively last week, but now it seems like it's turning into some kind of good, good
collateral benefit.
Exactly, because now, you know, it's now about, if the money is not in your possession, it's not your money. You keep your money in the bank, and you end up losing it because someone's taking a risky bet on, you know, customer
using
funds.
your money.
Your money. So now they're saying, you know what, maybe Bitcoin might be the better option, because
because you're able to follow it, it's in your custody.
Yes, in your custody. But there's still a risk of being your own bank. You could lose. So we're all caught in
like most things is everywhere. Yeah. Now, quite a number of people are surprised that oil prices have also been affected by this SVB collapse.
Yeah,
because the markets are spooked.
Yeah, the markets are spooked, and obviously we know oil prices react to any kind of financial crisis or anything that shows demand is going to slow. And obviously this is a big one if it actually blows up. And we're seeing, you know, all markets react to that. It dropped about $1 after dropping last week. It dropped about $3. So that oil market, the prices have been on a downward trend, obviously because we've seen some kind of stability when it comes to, you know, supply, oil supply to the global market. So that's been helping keep prices down. But at the end of the day, we still have that China, the weaker than expected economic data from China. That also, you know, impacted, because China is the biggest buyer. You know, anything that impacts their purchases,
it tends to give everybody else a headache.
Exactly. So we're seeing all of that, you know, play into the oil market. But it's still on that downtrend, you know, which is good, because it's also helping play into that inflation story, you know, globally. Because if energy prices go down, that would help, you know, bring, you know, global inflation down. So at the end of the day, Bill, we know the bulls want oil prices elevated so they can make profit, but
we'll have to see all that pan out. And of course, Laddie and the crew will be on right after this on Business Morning, and later on Business Incorporated, with all this news and all the other news from business around the world. Thanks, Laddie. Finally on the program, the Oscars might be over, but reactions are still trailing in from Sunday's event. The film Navalny, about the poisoning that nearly killed Alexei Navalny, Russia's most prominent opposition leader, and his detention upon his 2021 return to Moscow, won the Oscar for Best Feature Documentary. The documentary follows Mr. Navalny as he recovers in Germany from his poisoning in Siberia, where the Soviet-era nerve-toxin, which Western nations said was a Russian state assassination attempt to silence the outspoken critic of President Vladimir Putin. However, the Kremlin denied any involvement. 46-year-old Alexei Navalny is the highest profile of the few remaining opposition voices in Russia, and is serving his sentence in a maximum security penal colony in Russia. Supporters say his health has deteriorated after around a dozen spells in solitary confinement.
Melanie Miller, and Shane Boris.
Government.
Alexei, the world has not forgotten your vital message to us all. We must not be afraid to oppose dictators and authoritarianism wherever it rears its head. I want to invite Yulia to say a few quick remarks. Yulia?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everybody here. My husband is in prison just for telling the truth. My husband is in prison just for defending democracy. Alexei, I am dreaming the day when you will be free and our country will be free. Stay strong, my love. Thank you.
Yulia Navalny, the wife of the jailed Alexei Navalny, speaking there. That's how we wrap up our program today. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Dudwale. Do have a pleasant Tuesday ahead. Good morning.